Thank you for doing the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Mike Prevet. Mike, thanks for being here.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, I was trying to think. You've been on two, maybe three times. I can't remember. You've been on before many times, but I follow your content. I'm always learning from your content. When I think about the cybersecurity, industry from an economic or a market perspective, you're one of the top people I follow, over at Return on Security. But for folks that don't know Return on Security, can you give folks a brief recap?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on so many times. It's been great. But yeah, Return on Security is a research and intelligence business that tracks the economic kind of activities of the cybersecurity industry. So all the funding, all the acquisitions, layoffs, shutdowns, IPOs, public and private companies. And I just try to take almost like an OSINT approach to market data and trying to make sense of what that means for practitioners and founders and investors alike.
Yeah, you got a lot of great insights on M&A, funding rounds, how it compares to previous funding rounds, categories, you name it, right? So as we did this in 2024, if I'm not mistaken too, but as you look back on 2025, you're probably going to put a dedicated piece out on this, knowing I follow you in the past and this is what you've done. But, when you look at the year, like what are some high level major trends this year, like, that you've seen unfold, maybe some that were surprising, some that were the same as last year? Like when you look back, what is top of mind for you?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing out of the gate for this year is just how much more active this year is than the past few years. So it wasn't just by a little bit, as of right now today, and all the data's not in for 2025, but it's up almost 60% year over year, just like the funding activity. So tons and tons of more funding, volume and dollars. Which is good. It's good to see the industry kind of get a healthy surge back into that. And then on the M&A front as well, like obviously there were some of the largest M&A rounds ever this year in cyber. And again, like more dollar volume, more dollar and more volume of deals as well. So that's kind of the macro picture itself. And then when you drill into that, you start seeing a bit more emphasis on the later stage rounds. So like a lot of the public companies, I call it kind of the giants are waking back up again after they've been sleeping for a couple of years. They're doing lots of stock splits and deals. They're raising post IPO debt and equity rounds. They're buying companies left and right, and they were just kind of largely just riding the public wave there for a couple of years. But they've really woken back up now. And I think a lot of that is driven by obviously just the excitement and fervor around AI in general.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a couple questions on that. So when you say like the dollar volume, the activity is up 60% year over year from 2024. Like, what do you think is driving that? 'Cause if I'm not mistaken, we touched on this last year. It was like peak 2021 kind of COVID era, full on remote, like things were crazy, right? Like ZERP, all the things, right? Zero interest, et cetera. And then there was kind of a lull for some years, a couple of years after that. Like, what do you think is driving this resurgence? Is it economic policies, administration changes, just the industry kind of bouncing back out of that lull? Like, what's driving the behavior change, you think?
I think it's actually many of those things you mentioned. One, after 2022, about midway when the brakes got pulled on interest rates and the world like froze up in general, a lot of companies had a hard time making it through those the next 1 to 2 years after that. But then the ones who did make it through were a bit stronger than they were or they would have been otherwise. And I think that created some better companies that also stopped a few companies in their tracks that probably shouldn't have gone on as far and probably would have gone on further had the interest rate plug not been pulled. So they kind of just pruning, so to speak, of the industry, like if you're into gardening. And so I think that then generated some better branch of companies to come out. And then obviously at the same time, then AI hit the world from the ChatGPT launch. And that pretty much lit a fire under so many other things. And not just in cyber, but the rest of the tech in general. And what was previously impossible became a lot more within grasp. Like pretty much every week, things started to change. Momentum started happening in terms of like how quickly you could produce a product and how quickly you could do MVPs and actually get to raising money and revenue. And so I think that combination of the tech industry kind of evolving the last couple of years made a big difference. And then they already had those kind of sound fundamentals of, you can't just burn money for the sake of burning money. It has to be important. It either has to be like talent acquisition or capability acquisition, and it needs to be smarter capital, I would say. And so I think investors and founders got a bit more attuned to that. And then everything just kept riding the wave up on AI, and I think when it comes to like economic policies too, the interest rates have been dropping again, so that leads people to want to invest more money. And you've seen this kind of globally too. Like I think the European or the Central Bank of England just cut rates again today, and that's just following all the major economies around the world are trying to reduce interest rates, which is more favorable for lending money. And so more people were able to kind of put that capital to work. And I think people are also realizing that the path to IPO and the traditional path of what a company who raises VC funding is expecting, it's either get acquired or go IPO. I think that IPO window had been shut so hard from 2022 that people kind of just said, all right, let's write that off. Let's just make a really great private company and sell it to other private companies, or just live on that way and just forego the IPO roadshow and all the headache that comes with that. And I think that's kept a lot of money kind of in the ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah, you used an analogy there about kind of fire, analogous to fire, and I had shared a piece with you, I don't know, maybe a couple of months back. It was about the AI ecosystem and venture capital and spending in startups, and they had used this kind of forest fire analogy where you burn off the dead wood and things like that. And you kind of reminded me of that when you were we went through this area, this phase, I guess you'd say, like you said, where it wasn't growth at all costs. It was, show profitability, show sustainability, resiliency, that you can actually run a sustainable, long-term, financially healthy company. And I think that may have been for the best in the long-term, interest of the ecosystem, to be honest. But then again, now you said rates are lowering, money's kind of being a little bit easier to lend and acquire, et cetera. AI. There's been a really interesting conversation. Caleb Sima, Chengxi Wang, and others have been sharing thought pieces around like build versus buy and how AI is impacting that. And to your point, I think now founders can not only go with a pitch deck, but they can go with a prototype, right? Things that they can show early on to investors and get more interest. And you had raised that point that maybe the IPO window opening back up is, playing a factor too. As you said, I think there were some administration things, regulatory things, financial, economic things that play there too. But on the other end of that, Cole from Strategy of Security, which I think you follow as well, he's been speaking a good bit about that, but also how a lot of companies are kind of choosing to stay private longer or just stay private entirely, avoid the scrutiny of the public market. They can get acquired by large players still. There's still plenty of capital in the private market. When you look at that, what do you think's driving some companies to just say, what, hey, we're not even going to shoot for the IPO route. We're just going to stay private. And like, what are some of the benefits or trade-offs that they're kind of implicitly making there?
Yeah, well, the few companies that have gone public, not even just within cyber in the past couple of years, haven't really done super well, to be honest. It's been a kind of a cold turkey market to roll into. And the stock markets had not been, positive to them. The incumbents have done pretty well. The people who are already there, who came at a very different time and had very different economics to get there, and the cost was very different. And now the bar is so much higher. So I think that's, reading a lot of what Cole writes as well. He, the bar has risen significantly since the days of the large companies in the cyber industry have gone public, to the tune of 3 to 10x what it used to be to get there. So that's an incredible hurdle to overcome in and of itself. And then obviously the regulatory scrutiny, like the past several years in the U.S., especially IPO has been challenging, but so has large M&A, like especially if you're a public company. So that's kind of another closing of a window, so to speak. If am I going to get extra scrutiny because I'm a public company now and I'm trying to make a large acquisition potentially later on? So that's one less thing to take off the table to not worry about. And then there's super healthy demand for just shares of private companies because they are in secondary shares or even tertiary shares, of which thing I learned about recently, where a third fund is buying shares from a secondary fund that's buying shares from a private fund, which is pretty amazing. The financial engineering that goes into that, but people had a way to get their money out, basically. without having to go through the IPO route. And that's kind of what it always comes back to. Obviously, shareholder value and increasing all that, and paying off investors, and is always kind of the name of the game when it comes to this. And there's just been a different way to do that without the overhead of IPO and the regulatory scrutiny. Because once you go IPO, once you go public, you have very different sets of like regulators and economics to deal with. Not alone like public perception that can change your stock price quite a bit, any given day. So I think people just didn't want to deal with it. And I don't know that we'll see a flood back anytime soon, to be honest, just because what's happening now is still kind of working pretty well for those companies who stayed that way. So, and it's the economy, or I should say the public markets, are very a path of least resistance kind of thing. They like things to go up and to the right, and don't mess with that. If you do, all hell will break loose. So yeah, don't just avoid it is kind of been the name of the game.
Yeah. You said a few things there I wanted to highlight. It's like I'm a layman when it comes to these things, but the path to liquidity, the secondary and tertiary shares, or paths to liquidity is something that I've been learning about this year. And, again, I'm a layman on this topic, but I feel like it's, in some ways, it feels like watching like the housing financial crisis, where people are just kind of like handing off these hot potatoes, and eventually like the music is going to stop somewhere, I would think. Yeah. Maybe not, hopefully not. It'd have a financial reckoning, I'm sure, if that was to happen, but it does feel like some parallels there. And then, to your point about the public markets being somewhat harsh or unforgiving, like I've been, again, following Cole, and he's like showing how some of the firms that are public are producing, double-digit revenue growth and all this, and they're still getting hammered by the public market when they announce their profits and stuff. So it's interesting to see that unfold, and I'm not entirely sure why that's the case. If they're growing, they're scaling successfully, like I don't know why that would be the case, but it seems to be that, like you said, just higher scrutiny from the public markets, not only from regulators, but the markets themselves as well. Of course, AI has been a hot topic. You had published a piece this year. It was kind of a contrarian view, I think, to some extent. It was titled "The AI Absorption Has Begun." And in that, you said, you said that AI security represented just 9% of cyber deals and 3% of funding. When I read that, I was like, no way in hell. Because like every time you open LinkedIn or look at the news, like there's some new AI startup, a massive Series X round, right? That's just record setting or whatever the case is. And so like what, tell us about that piece and some of the things that you found there, because it was surprising, honestly, for me.
Yeah, honestly, it was surprising for me too when I started digging into the data, which is why I love starting with data and trying to unpack like what's happening from there. But when you look at our industry, we love names, we love categories, we love acronyms. And we love to spin because everyone wants an edge. It's a market where many different players can survive, even if they do very similar things. And so everyone's vying for the proverbial dollar and just the attention on that space. And so we often get some creative marketing that will create new categories. But if you kind of peel back some of these things and look at what a lot of these companies who kind of initially were funded or came out of stealth under this AI security umbrella, which is 2 years ago, we didn't know what that meant, and fast forward to today, now that word is like, it almost means nothing. There's so many fractures within that. There's so many different ways you can spin that, as I was tracking the data, I kind of just started to peel back some of the marketing layer. I'm like, well, you're not just AI security company. You're actually a company that's supporting security operations through AI workflows or through agents or some combination thereof. But your core message is security operations. Like that's what you're trying to do. You just so happen to do that by using some AI tools or some chatbots or things like that to achieve a goal. And so I started trying to classify things based on what they actually did and to kind of normalize a bit between companies and be able to compare. And what I found was like a very, very small amount of companies that have come out are actually doing anything specifically to AI models, or securing foundation models, or securing like model weights, or doing something around like a red teaming aspect to get a model to do something unsafe or unpredictable. But it's an extremely small number compared to the rest of the companies in our industry who've been raising money. Now, the tricky part is there's pretty much no way to quantify just how much money has been spent in the name of AI when it comes to cyber. Because like now, this is kind of the piece of the post about AI absorption, is that it's been absorbed into the way of working the same way the cloud was, there's really no need to call it out unless you're doing something deeply specific into the AI models themselves. And that's kind of the way I've been approaching it and categorizing things. And when you frame it in that way, it's a drop in the bucket. The broader AI security spending of like AI for security or security for AI, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of cyber, which is still very data protection heavy, very identity heavy. Identity is everything, especially now with agents and the continuation of non-human. So I saw it as this is a good thing in terms of, yes, it's all we hear about, but now it's just a way of working as opposed to a separate standalone thing that's on a line item in someone's security program budget. Unless you have a very specific business model as a company, it's probably going to be something you don't, look at that closely. So it's,
I think you're spot on. As I read that piece at first, I was like, oh, what the hell, and then I read it and I sat back and thought about it. And I was like, I think you're right in the sense that, AI is kind of ubiquitous in the sense of like a utility, like electricity or internet, right? Or software. Like how many times over the years do we hear, we're not a software company, but now every company uses software. And now it's going to be the same with AI. It's going to be ubiquitous or kind of embedded in everything we do. And then we've often, this year and the year before, like a lot of, there was like AI for security and securing AI. And I think what you're speaking about is securing AI is like kind of a standalone thing, right? But the AI for security is just the next wave of security products, whether it's apps like GRC, SecOps. Like you look at every category, someone's looking to use LLMs, AI, and agents to revolutionize or address systemic issues in those categories.
Exactly.
And I think that's the way the industry is kind of maturing. And, speaking of that, you've also talked about how we're kind of moving into this governance stage of the AI evolution. Now that the industry's matured a bit, from AI and agents, what does that governance stage look like? Or, how do you think about that next phase?
Yeah, so I think the AI governance phase we're in is I'd say a natural progression I've seen through other like tech epochs or waves within our industry. So, most typically when a new tech comes out or a new kind of frontier, cyber is the first one to say, we don't know what this is. Let's just block it. Let's stop it. Let's block it. We don't know. Let's only use the ones we like or don't use it at all. And so that was like wave one. And so you saw a lot of companies either lean fully into that blocking and stopping everything at the proverbial perimeter when ChatGPT launched. And then you saw others who tried to lean into it and try to steer them to, just use the enterprise version of it. Don't use this version of it. And then the next kind of wave was where we're at now is like what I call the governance and posture managementification of the space. Well, okay, so we know a bit more about it, but now we need to know what we don't know. So we need to do some discovery. We need to understand what each of these things are doing. We need to draw some kind of soft or hard borders around what is an agent and what is an agent behavior and what is the blast radius of an agent. And I think this is a really good iteration in the industry. And it's you see the same thing with cloud. So the same thing with any other technology that's kind of been in this like a kind of a big changer or a game changer for like the world as a whole. And so now it's about defining what is right and what is not right, giving some guardrails around things, making sure that the things that do have access or that do use agents are using it on the happy path of things. And so that's I've seen a lot of that this year. As a lot of companies are realizing that's what their customers need. Like, hey, we don't know what we don't know. Give us something so we can at least make some decisions, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's so funny you frame it like that, because as you've been in this space long enough, like you and I, we're getting older, I guess, but you see these same waves of patterns of behavior. Like the technology may change, right? But as you said, inventory, discovery, visibility, governance, posture management. It's just like a cyclical thing with the technological wave, and new tools, new vendors, new products, et cetera, come out to address those issues. And then you move towards detection and response. It's like the NIST CSF lifecycle epitome, kind of materialized in products, essentially, is what we see happen. Yeah,
exactly.
And then,
no, I agree.
No, go ahead. I
would say, no, I totally agree with that. And I think that's the next wave is like, we're going to be doing detection and response of all these types of things, because what they can do is far more interesting or impactful and fast than what humans can do currently. So it's going to be pretty wild.
Yeah, another thing you said there I really liked is, if you think about it, you're saying we've kind of matured. It's only been about a year and a half, 2 years, right? I feel like we and I put this in one of the articles I wrote, is like, everyone knows the crossing the chasm, right? Of, early adopters, innovators, late adopters, laggards, et cetera. Security is almost historically a laggard. Like, we're very risk averse. We just want to block something. And we saw that early on with Gen AI, I'm sorry. But it feels like we kind of short circuited that cycle quickly, because we've learned from past mistakes. If we go out, we're heavy handed, we're cumbersome, we block things, the business finds a way, developers find a way, and it's just rinse and repeat of bolting on rather than building in security. So now I see security trying to be, forward leaning and innovative and be an early adopter with AI. And we know we have to. Developers are using it. The business is using it. We keep seeing reports of Anthropic and others showing how attackers are using it. Like, if we don't, do the same, it's just going to exacerbate these longstanding challenges we already have. So yeah, that was a great point. And I wanted to ask you too, like, another trend, I think, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but there's been major moves. You talked about this early on by some of the large industry, titans, like I guess you'd call them, I don't want to drop all names, but the large platform players in the ecosystem. Some have cited it as maybe being an indication that we're moving towards some consolidation of some sort. Obviously, there's a platform push being made by some of these large providers. Like, what is your perspective on that? Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a bit of you have to show up and have an answer for it, because these large platform companies have very large customers who say, hey, when are you going to roll out X? And like, they're waiting for that, because they have very expensive licenses. They cover a lot of ground. They rely on them quite a bit for their security programs. And so they want to know, hey, when can I have an answer to this from you? So there's a bit of it. These companies have to have an answer, and the answer may be go buy somebody, and so you can bolt it in, or just offer it, and which is a fine answer. I've actually seen a ton of that happen, just like in the general AI space, buying teams or tech or IP or things like that. And so they know they have to do that, and they know that people are going to look to them to drive some of these things. And I also believe that that companies are going to have to operate this way, like, no matter what, they're going to have a way to use AI in what they're doing. And so I think a lot of them are trying to understand how they can roll those kind of features and kind of learnings into what's already existing. Like, kind of goes back to the earlier comment about how, like, it's impossible to quantify how much money has been spent in the name of AI in security. And that's like another piece of it as well. Like, they can help. I got to talk to a founder who exited to a really large platform company, one of the first AI security companies, like AI security proper. And they said, they quickly moved off their product and was quickly moved into helping that larger company use and like learn how to do these things faster and better, iterate across all their products. So it was very interesting, kind of side quest that I didn't realize that would be so attractive. But there's just so much at stake here, and perception shifts very quickly. Obviously, the market shifts very quickly, and if for one reason or another, an industry, or an analyst or equity analyst may not believe you're going to be able to keep pace with like your competitors who are doing the same, then the stock's going to go down. And that's kind of the world we live in, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's ironic because we, build versus buy. Like, we always talk about that from the perspective of, the enterprise, depending if they build a product or tool or go buy it. The same kind of dilemma or discussion exists for these large platform players. Like, do we try to build this ourselves? Or do we have competitive pressures from the market, from investors, from whomever, peers in the industry, right, who are in the same category as us, where we need to go out and buy. We need to be moving fast and be a fast mover on this front. So they have those same discussions. And to your point, sometimes they acquire a company and really try to integrate that product and technology into their platform, or other times they just come and bring the expertise and try to kind of build that natively in their own platform with the expertise that they've now essentially acqui-hired, I guess you'd say, in some cases. So yeah, it's all fascinating. So as we look to 2026, kind of maybe the last question for you here, what are you working on? What should people keep an eye out for? I know you're probably going to have a comprehensive report coming out, breaking down the past year. Any other side projects, things you want to throw out there too?
Oh yeah, well, so definitely doing a big annual report. It should come out maybe end of January. That's where I cut off a time frame and take all the numbers and then try to see what the stories, the data can tell me that are beyond kind of just like the surface level stats. So be on the lookout for that. That takes me like far too many hours to write, but I really enjoy doing it. So that's big. And then just continuing to build. On our conversation earlier about security people leaning into AI. I've spent a bunch of time just leaning into just using AI myself to try to build out as much as possible, build software and dashboards and things like that where I don't have it, or I couldn't have had it 6 months ago and now I can have it. So it's an extremely exciting time, I think, to be like building and be in this industry. So maybe I'll launch something around that as we go on. But now I'm just having fun building stuff for me.
Awesome. Very cool. And, I'm with you there. Like I'm not, necessarily building too much or coding too much with it, but when it comes to critical thinking or analysis or looking at the industry and like extending it to use tools to get real-time data and research, like I find myself using it every day now. And like, it's just so much more faster, so much more efficient. I couldn't imagine like not having this tool at my fingertips.
Right.
So it's here to stay for sure. All right. Well, returnonsecurity.com. Mike, thanks so much for jumping on, man. I always appreciate your analysis, your perspective, and looking forward to hopefully running into each other at some events this year coming up.
Yes, likewise. And thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care, man.
Thanks. See ya.